Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of stories from across the internet. In this series we will be focusing on a web novel called There Is No Epic Loot Here, Only Puns, and in this video we will be doing chapters 4 to 6. I hope that you enjoy. There is no epic loot here, only puns, chapter 4, The Piggy in the Middle. Balta didn't have to wait long for Hob and Gob. They announced themselves with a screech and an oink as they barreled into the dungeon. Delta's mouth dropped open as they carried a rather large pig into the tunnel, the animal squirming and squealing just as loudly as the goblins. "Mans!" Hob warned. Gob was screamed at the pig and bit him. Fran stood up with a sharp look and rushed towards the entrance. Turning the corner of the new tunnel, Gob threw the pig down, and Delta closed her eyes for the next part as soon as the mana flowed towards her. It was plump and calm. Delta enjoyed the feeling. This feeling was much better than... She gagged, and her sight shot open as Hob dropped the dreaded mushrooms all over the dungeon floor. Delta bent over and felt winded as the vile taste of mushrooms overwhelmed her senses. "Man!" Gob shouted again, and Delta tried to inhale as she watched her mana numbers grow, from the measly 6 all the way up to 20. The pig had just gave her with 15 mana in a single pop. The remaining mushroom pushed past the limit as she struggled to reach the number beyond her max, 25. Then it began to trickle down as the excess mana seemed to leak away. This was enough for her new monster, and she hurried. Delta stumbled to her feet on the first bend in the dungeon. She picked a spot close to the wall, and the 3 goblins made a warning noises at the person approaching the dungeon entrance. Delta focused. "Mushroom spitter," she ordered as she saw the orb pulse once. Then from the ground a cap appeared. Then it grew rapidly until Delta was staring at a mushroom almost as big as a child and firmly anchored to the ground. Then the living fungus wiggled and the stalk split apart horizontally to reveal a big toothy maw filled with some vicious green liquid. She would later deny having squealed in fright in any way, shape, or form. It gargled at the dungeon, and it blinked as 2 beady eyes glowed. It seemed to send some mental, "I live to serve" feeling to her before it focused intently on the corner where the goblins seemed to roar. Delta ordered them all back, curious to see what her new mushroom could do. The grey flesh and dark cap made it blend well into the dungeon. It was then that Delta finally noticed that her dungeon was almost pitch black beyond the first turn. Didn't dungeons have eternal torches with glow bugs? Did she need some UV or night vision? Mana vision? Mushy, she deemed him, wiggled as his goblin ran past, understanding them as dungeon, letting them past, albeit with a sense of annoyance to him. Dalton knew, just knew, and one of them had bumped into it, it would have chomped down with a vengeance. It didn't seem to really like anything other than its damp wall. "Blasted cobs, just get back here and give me back my pig," the man shouted, his voice more angry than afraid. He turned the corner and Delta blinked at the man held a small gun. Delta came closer, nervous, but the man didn't seem to sense her. The gun was a stone device held 2 hands, and had a small crystal plugged into the handle and a wide muzzle, but the gun had an almost cartoonish iron sight. Delta goggled at it, trying to understand what she was looking at. The crystal glowed orange, and Delta tried to see inside, but the man moved through the air. As the man drew near to the close to the Mushy, did what Delta guessed was what Mushy would do in any circumstance. It lashed forward and took out a chunk out of the man's leg. Delta blanched at the sight of the man's wounds, but the man screamed and fired the device in his hands. The end erupted into a gout of fire that consumed Mushy. The fire mushroom screeched and then promptly melted. "Mushy!" Delta screamed, feeling a little awareness of the monster fade as it was killed. The man gasped and tried to pull himself up the wall, gun pointed down. Delta knew logically that the man had every right to defend himself and to get revenge for his pig. It was only fair. But Delta also felt that a farmer with a boomstick was unfair. Really unfricking fair. "Fran, Hobgob!" Delta yelled, and the goblins rushed out. She closed her eyes, not enjoying the unfairness of the situation, on her side or on the man's. Mana flowed out, but Delta ignored it. This was not how she wanted things to go. This wasn't how she wanted things to go at all. To survive, she needed mana and DP. To get them, she needed time or resources. Delta either needed to kill or gather resources. Mushrooms came guilt-free. She could make the goblins understand she didn't want to kill anyone who didn't. This wasn't fair. She shouldn't have to be making moral codes for monsters and trying to live with the result. Goblins don't steal from the mans again. Just bring me things from the forest that doesn't belong to a man. She begged, and the goblins seemed to shuffle as they listened to the air. Not one piggies, Hob said quietly. No man's piggies, Delta agreed gently. Her mana had skyrocketed from 11 to 32 due to the forest's demise. The gun on the ground was also dissolved quickly. This wasn't a normal world of farmers and knights. That thing reeked of technology. She created a new mushy on the same spot, the thing shivering as it still upset the previous mushy's death. Delta was sure that they were different mushroom monsters. They had different markings on their cap. The man had been worth 21 mana, more than her max total. Her new mushy, the resulted dwindling back to 19. The gun finished being taken apart, the crystal as the last thing to go. Her mana shot up to 69 and Delta blinked as the little box appeared. Torches have been added to the construct menu due to fire element. Goblin campfire has been added to the construction menu due to fire element. Flame gout trap weak added to the construction menu due to fire element. Delta wanted to squirm and look, but the mana was already beginning to dip lower. She returned the main core room and fired another hallway tunnel to the north, the earth quickly giving way to space. Moved to the end, then she created a room. It crumbled into an almost perfect shape. But she was still 19 mana up. Delta moved back to her first bend and threw down a pitfall trap. It left her 14 over. After that moment's thought, she created another mushy in her core room, bringing her total mana to 21. The last mana held on, and she blinked. Not sure why it wasn't fading. Opening the menu, she felt surprise rise up, as her max total was now 25. How did that happen? Delta knew that she had 20 exact when she had begun to spend. She built a hallway like she did before, another mushy after the second bend and the entrance to the tunnel, and a room. Delta eyed the new room, the deepest part of the dungeon now. It felt like she was less crushed, as if her mind had more space to stretch itself, and the room added 5 more extra mana. That was interesting. A lovely little discovery. Delta closed her eyes and sent a small prayer to the farmer. His death was helping her, but she needed to ease the bubbling guilt rising up, even if they were charged into the cave after a pair of goblins that Darwin's ward were level of stupid. Thanks, she added lamely, not particularly religious, but still hoping it helped. She eyed the furthest room as the 2 goblins left for the forest. It would be better to have a core there than in the middle of the dungeon. Would you like to move your core? Costs 10 DP. Delta frowned for a moment and then clicked yes without a word. One day she would finish a monologue without having a handy notification solve her problems. She had paid the price, choking as she saw she had 82 DP. The core rumbled and flashed, the earth altar holding it breaking apart. The orb floated gently up the tunnel, and then into another groan of earth rose up and gripped the core tightly. Just like that, she had a new core room, with another room to defend her. Delta snorted. Soon she would be good enough to be called a tutorial dungeon. With some grumbling, she moved back to the old core room, and saw Mushy was still skulking in the shadows. Delta hummed. It would be a shame to have such a whole room dedicated to one Mushy when there was that layer thing that she could buy. Can I move the mushroom? She asked. The little box appeared. Moving stationary monsters costs 1 mana and takes 10 minutes. Would you like to move the mushroom spitter? It asked just as she guessed. Delta felt smart and crouched down to stare with some interest at the mushroom glowed as it slowly transported into the hallway by what looked like a magic plant pot of all things. Delta began to flick through the menus after a minute. Magic was cool, but slowly fading mushrooms being carried down the hall was not as great as it seemed. The things that she could outright buy. Mana 20 out of 25, regen 1 per day. Construction, corridor 50 feet, 10 mana. Room 10 length, 15 wide, 20 mana. Torches, 1 mana per torch. Goblin fire pit, 5 mana. Monsters, goblin, chosen beginner monster, 10 mana. Mushroom spitter, 13 mana. Traps, low-grade pitfall, 5 mana. And then there were the things that she still needed to purchase with not regenerating DP. Dungeon points 72. Construction purchase, layer, 20 DP, 1 per level. Next level, locked. Boss room, 40 DP, 1 per level. Monster purchase, common bat, 5 DP. Common spider, 5 DP. Trap purchases, sticky floor panel, 10 DP. Weak tripwire, 5 DP. Falling rock weak, 10 DP. Flame gout trap, 8 DP. Delta saw the evolution menu was unlocked, but she decided to hold off on the temptation as the mushy was finally moved. She flicked through the menu and tapped layer, and the map opened up in front of her, and the only empty room flashed for confirmation. Shrugging, Delta tapped it, and the surrounding room shifted as the earth rose and the walls bulged slightly. Tiny, hay-filled alcoves formed in a single stone hut, small enough for a dog or a crawling goblin formed. Delta grinned as she saw the changes that she had wrought with a single push of a button. The lair seemed to be a resting spot for humanoid monsters. The alcove suggested a place to snooze between battles. Shrugging, Delta added a fire goblin pit, and a box appeared. Would you like to make the lair a goblin camp? Bonus healing to goblins. Delta hit confirmation, then the room changed to having an empty racks of meat. The alcoves were replaced with a small tribal huts, and a decent-sized fire roared to life in the center, lighting the room up as it crackled with a merry purpose. Fran appeared and began to praise her. Delta waved it off, feeling a blush coming to her ghostly face. Fran sat down, warming his hands by the fire. Delta smiled at his delighted face. She opened up the menu and browsed through the upgrade menu. Upgrade menu. Total DP 52, total mana 15. Construction. Upgrade entrance to the simple dungeon hall, 10 DP or 20 mana. Upgrade dungeon dirt walls into wood reinforced dirt walls, 10 DP. Upgrade simple wooden torches into stone sconces, 10 DP. Traps. Upgrade pitfall into deep pitfall, 10-foot drop makes it harder to get out, 15 DP. Monsters. Goblins evolve into Goblin Thug, 5 mana and 2 DP, or Goblin Archer, 5 mana and 2 DP, or Goblin Apprentice, 5 mana and 2 DP. Price per goblin. Mushroom Spitter. Greater Mushroom, 10 mana, or Myconid, 10 mana. Rare. Monster Evolution. Fran, Goblin, can evolve into boss due to pigment absorbed, unable to begin process due to lack of boss room. Delta turned slowly back to the humming Fran. Boss monster? Delta looked over the construction menu and saw the list did indeed allow for a boss room. She just didn't give it much thought. In hindsight, it was rather obvious. But why did Fran need a pig to become a boss? End of chapter. There is no epic loot here, only puns. Chapter 5, The Human Touch. Boss rooms are trials. Delta paced as she waited for Hob and Gob to return with more of those wretched things. Mana was already an issue on a large spending. Delta couldn't afford just to turn down a free source of income, especially when it came with free DP. She just wished that they wouldn't find something else. Anything else. So, as she waited, Delta wandered the boss room. Having one meant that her core had a final layer of protection before someone reached her core. That was good. She'd need to evolve Fran into something else with a pig as backup, in the form of something that she may not want protecting her core. The mushies were hard enough to look at without fleeing. Seeing one yawning or just hissing at the air made her ghostly flesh break out in goosebumps. It was also just the idea of having a boss room meant that Delta was cementing her purpose as a dungeon. Fight the weak mobs, find the loot, beat the boss, level up, and go home. The bread and butter of any good adventure, except Delta didn't have loot or some grand treasure chest at the end. I'm not subpar, I'm still developing, she assured herself, and Fran's ears flicked, as if hearing, but choosing not to comment, as he enjoyed the new goblin camp. The little guy did look more healthy in the glow of the fire. Delta summed up his life as a dungeon core. Make a dungeon, lure adventures, kill them, grow, lure more people. Delta felt like she could maybe, with some effort, cut it down to just lure and grow stage somehow. Far be it for Delta to stop an idiot wandering in here with nothing but a pot in his head and a butter knife. Delta felt bad about luring in the unaware or lost, not the terminally stupid. That was practically doing the species as a whole a favor after all. You don't feel sorry for people who set their head on fire and expect to be fine. No, Delta wanted to have people agree to the game of a Dungeon and Goblins, win and get the shinies, lose, and well, thanks for playing. It seemed too hopeful, but if Delta could just show those that came near her that her dungeon was dangerous and unprepared should turn around and walk away, then she'd just feel better about the whole defending herself against humanity thing. Maybe I can, Delta muttered, and opened a menu to the construction upgrade section. Upgrade entrance into simple entrance hall, 10 DP or 20 mana. Delta thought about it. She could purchase both the boss room and the entrance hall, having 2 DP to spare, and potentially having a way more for her gobs to return. With more mushrooms, Delta swallowed back more gags and tried to focus. It seemed that making a boss monster had no actual price, that worried Delta. Nothing good was free in this little new life of hers, except for mushrooms, but they could go die in a fire. Once she got the boss room up and running, there did seem to be no extra steps needed for pushing Fran up to the next level of evolution, with a pick involved, somehow. Perhaps it was undoable, a one-time no-take-backies. Would Fran be her forever level 1 floor boss? Was that really a bad thing? Maybe down the line, when she had an uber wizards and 3-headed frost wolves, it would be, but for now, she had 2 fungi and 3 goblins between her and smashed to bits death. Necessity was the mother of bad choices. Delta purchased both rooms, and the boss room flashed red and refused to be purchased. Delta blinked and saw a map opening, her 2 rooms flashing red. Right, need a room. To make a boss room. 1 step at a time. A room cost 20 mana, and she had 15 going for her. Delta glared at the tiny single mana regen. One day, she would regen enough mana to spend as wasteful as she wanted. Oh, the gobs were back. Joy. She zoomed into the entrance and saw them carrying more mushrooms. But Gob had something in his other hand. He dropped it and it landed with a thud. Is that an apple? Gob, where did you get an apple? She asked the goblin and shook his hands free in defense. Tree, climbed with teeth, belonged to no man's. He promised. Delta watched it fade into a dungeon, consumed it. It tasted sweet, but Delta braced herself for the dropping of more mushrooms. Ugh. But the apple made her mind spin. The mushrooms gave her the mushies, and the fire crystal gave her some fire-related items. Gob, go bring me a few more branches and rocks, she requested. Delta thought about how her tunnels were just banished whatever soil was in the way, and she hadn't seen one rock or a root appear in any of them. It was just hard-packed soil. The apple finished fading into a menu popped up. Apple consumed, new menu unlocked. Item menu, healthy apple, 3 mana. Delta closed her eyes and then opened them again. Nope, she couldn't eat magic food out of fricking air. Why, was her first question, and that was a good one, she allowed. But why would she, a dungeon with no stomach or her monsters who didn't seem to need to eat, need an apple? It seemed a rather odd thing for her dungeon powers to have. Would she be able to plant them and in turn turn them into some kind of apple fiend? Exploding apple trees? Goblins throwing apples? Delta closed the box and put the thought to rest as Gob returned. He dropped 2 branches and some stones onto the ground. Delta watched with interest as the items vanished. Her mana was 22. The apple had given her 2 whole mana compared to 1 single from the mushroom. Was it because they were more healthy, or did the world hate the mushrooms as much as Delta did? Her mana shot to 32, the rocks about 2 mana each, and the larger branches giving her 3. Not that she needed to keep track of this. Gob would be going back for more soon. Delta rubbed her ghostly hands as she quickly made another hallway, shooting west from her core room and the new room to cap it off. That quickly brought her down to 2 mana. Her menu popped up as she finished. Wood functions are added to construction and trap menus. Stone functions are added to construction and trap menus. A quick flick through some of the changes. Her torches could be made into tiny lumps of stone on the wall instead of wood sticks now. No cost increased since it didn't seem to be very much better quality. However, as she peered at the purchase menu, she saw something very different. Trap purchases, sticky floor panel 10 DP, weak tripwire 5 DP, Falling Rock weak, 10 DP, 10 mana. Flame Gout, 8 DP. Stake Trap, 10 DP, covered, sharpened sticks designed to ruin boots and hurt feet. Construction purchases. Upgrade entrance to simple entrance hall, 10 DP or 20 mana. Upgrade dungeon dirt walls into wood reinforced dirt walls, 10 DP. Upgrade dungeon walls into rough rock walls. Required reinforced dirt walls. Upgrade simple wooden torches into stone sconces, 10 DP or 10 mana. Simple wooden door, 5 DP. Item purchases, moss, 5 DP. Delta looked at the list and saw several options before that was DP cost only, and now had a mana cost as well, allowing her to choose to spend mana instead of precious DP. Did supplying materials ease the burden of creation? By choosing to gather resources instead of simply waiting for a mana to build, did she circumvent the one-time cost with a mere effort? Delta wanted to giggle at the absurdity. Fran made her feel like she wasn't the only dungeon around. Did other dungeons do this? Surely. Did they? Then, again, how many had access to contractor goblins and a forest? She hummed as Hob and Gob ran back out. Something other than mushrooms, she called, but wasn't sure that they heard. Ah, well, who knows, maybe they'd find burgers, or some soda. A girl turned to Dungeon Call, good hope. She quickly paid the fee to move her core to the new room, and felt a little tingle of excitement grow as the orb floated gently down to the new tunnel. From the 69 DP to 59, which left her with plenty to play with. As she waited for the core to fully move, Delta spent 10 DP at the entrance. It made her giddy, almost ecstatic to see the world shift at her command. Delta liked improving, she liked growing. She had to wonder how much that was built into her and how much was a human mind trying to understand the sheer impossibility of her current existence. The simple cave entrance was bulged and became more like a doorway. Arched and high, the tunnel immediately closest to it hollowed out on either side, making the space big enough for 5 people to stand comfortably. The ceiling domed up a little, making the space feel open and letting a bit of a breeze float down. The little chamber shuddered and 2 wooden beams formed on either side of the door, and then across the top. Delta's eyes glazed over as she saw from a distance. The outside of the new entrance had a single space above the hall. An impromptu Delta said to add something. Words. A warning. Delta shuddered as she focused on the words that she wanted to be carved into the wood. Well, here was a world. Dungeon Call Delta. On the outside, challenging the world, the tiny hole in the ground had 3 words carved into the wooden plank above the entrance. It simply claimed, one time, Here, be danger. Thanking the 2 gobs, she sent both of them back out. They seemed to enjoy gathering missions, so Delta left them to it. Besides, she was excited to do the next project. Before Delta left, she made 2 torches on either side of the little chamber, her last 2 mana gone. Like running water, the soil ran down and out before it hardened into a simple wooden sticks. Then, as if some deity spoke, the tips burst into a weak flame that lit the chamber up enough just to show how dark the tunnel ahead was. Delta likes them. If the warning and the creepy darkness didn't keep people out, then Mushy deserved some fun. Speaking of doing a great job, she praised the first Mushy wiggled. I had listened, and then, after a moment, hesitantly thanked her for the praise. It felt gruff and rather startled by having to actually talk to her. Okay, right, Delta said brightly, fleeing down the tunnel before she had to force more interaction with it. Delta wondered if she could ever make a cute monster. Not that she disliked mushies or her gobs, she just wished that she could have something that didn't look like it was designed solely for ripping throats out of people. She came to an empty room and flexed her fingers. Delta was honestly more curious about anything about what would happen. Would a door appear? Would the intruders need to find some skeleton key to gain an entrance? Delta clicked purchase and watched her DP drain, and the room pulsed before it stilled. Delta blinked. Where's my boss room? She demanded, and the map opened to cheerfully show the room now had a skull symbol on it. That meant boss room, apparently. So, this is what I get. Nothing happened, Delta skulked. She opened up the menu to see that Fran was able to evolve due to the empty boss room. Did any rare monsters have the ability to become a boss? Delta wondered what it took to make a rare monster in the first place. Hob and Gob were contracted, and she assumed that they were somehow voided of their power. What about Mushies? If she tried to get over the Mushies' gag reflexes and got onto the well with one of them, would that change anything? Shrugging, Delta hit the evolve button. Fran came zooming into the room, yelping as if he was pulled in by some invisible magnet. "Master, I serve!" he yelled as he landed in the middle of the room with a crash. Delta winced as he picked himself up. Then the room shuddered. It shook once, and then it didn't stop shaking. Fran looked around in amazement as the ground under his feet glowed. "Aye, boss?" he asked with a faint voice. He sniffed as the light travelled up his body. "I serve you until I dust," he promised, and then he was swallowed by the light and the room followed suit. Delta closed her eyes and the light grew brighter. Then there was a sound of oinking, and Delta blinked her eyes open. Her boring room was now far bigger than it should have been. As the dust settled and Delta could make out the details, she opened her map and saw that despite the fact that the room seemed to have grown about 3 times the previous size, the map claimed the actual space had not budged at all. "I broke space?" Delta choked. The bare soil ground and the walls had gone. The floor was rough, coarse dust or sand, mixing in with the soil underneath, but never truly spreading too far. Then the walls seemed to ripple and spread out of the room stretched. Only now did Delta see that all the corners had gone. There was some circular arena now. It even had a very rough seats for lost audiences or her gobs. On the far side, Delta saw a crack in the wall that stood out from the perfectly round room. "Fran?" she called, and she found the darkness came 2 red eyes. "Master, I serve you," came a much deeper voices than Fran's. The yoinking returned from the shadows of the new layer, and came a giant boar that slowly walked out as if nothing wanting to startle Delta. The long white tusks, the dark brown fur, the black hooves that all looked ready to inflict serious pain. But it was the red eyes that peered out from the single piece of rough armor that covered the pig that made Delta pause. Those eyes did not belong to a wild animal. On top, almost missable upon first glance, sat an armored figure. The slight gaps between the hands and wrists, body and neck showed a green skin. In one hand a giant crude metal spear, and the other a black leather reins to direct the pig. The goblin wore crude plate armor thick enough to actually protect from ranged arrows, and the most basic blunt weaponry, and the occasional sword swing. But Delta felt afraid for a moment as the pig would charge her. Then she remembered she was a ghost and started to breathe again. "Fran?" she asked, and the goblin raised its helmet to show a grinning face. It felt almost right, but not quite so. Delta tried again. "Sir Fran, the Pig Knight." Delta smiled as the name felt like a final deal of the whole matter, and torches burst into the light all around the room, like a roaring applause. "At your service, my lady." He and the pig bowed as one. Delta took it all back. Her monsters were adorable. She hid a smile as the pig bowed too low and Fran fell off, face-planting with a growl. The village of Durance moved on with his life. A man bargained with a baker, haggling the price of a wheat down to a tiny fire crystal at the back of the baker shop to supply the heat to the ovens. A woman handed the bucket to a pulley system that a water pump drew water into. The machine whirred and steam hissed out of the pump, cooled. A man argued with a woman as she demanded help. "He's been gone for almost half a day. His family is worried. Mr. Thorne never leaves his farm or his family for long, and he's not even done his cow milking yet." The woman huffed at the man's side. He ran his hand down his wrinkled jacket, the blue thing being passed from one generation of peacekeeper to another. In a town this size, only one was ever really needed. "I can take a look about it, Penny." But the man is an adult. If he went for a walk or found some peace finally, it's not our place to poke our noses in. I have got enough trouble with Hedgar melting his potion room wall and seeing his neighbor bathing. The husband is furious. Mrs. Willings has gone and angered some pixies down the road, and now her house is infested. I don't think that we need to call the king down for a man who's been missing less than a day or so. Johnny and the boys hunted down some gobs down. Maybe one messed with his fence. You know Son keeps the fire pistol handy, Chris assured the woman. She soured her face and then reluctantly agreed. Her eyes lit up a moment later. Did Heggar really see Goddy naked? She whispered, and with delight as Chris, our only beekeeper, endurance sighed. He sent a prayer above for anything to take the attention away from the nags and gossips. Delta choked. No. She slid down the wall into a tiny box in front of her globe with pride. Due to the consumption of mass poison mushrooms, level 1 has mushrooms freely added to the decorations and will now sprout on their own in the dungeon for free. Poison is reduced from the deadly to mildly toxic to avoid mana consumption. You can upgrade this later. Then before Delta's very eyes, little mushrooms poked out of the ground. They wiggled and then stilled, enjoying its new home. Then a new box appeared. Mushroom Grove Room unlocked. Cosmetic room with no bonuses. May build the room, regardless of max rooms per floor. Delta screamed. End of chapter. There is no epic loot here, only puns. Chapter 6, The Capped Limit. Boss rooms were amazing. Delta paced the hallway between her core and Fran's room. Not only did the new room push her max mana up to 30, it also increased her regen to 2 a day. It hadn't even been a full day since Delta had awoken. It had almost been... Delta didn't know. There was no time here besides moving wishes about took 10 minutes exactly, even if it was only a single meter away. Her only mana rose up from its own accord, and then she had a decent idea. Did dungeon calls expire? Did time affect her slower or as long as she was in a dungeon? Was she safe? Immortal from age? Delta felt a little cold at the idea of being trapped underground for the rest of time. At least she wasn't alone. She had her mushies and gobs and Fran. Everything a sane mind needed to last more than 24 hours. Speaking of, the goblins had returned, shooting a dirty look at the single mushroom growing on the ceiling. She would have the hob remove it. She zoomed to the entrance, flying past the snoozing Fran and his new pig, over to the goblin camp, where the mushrooms burned as it appeared too close to the fire. It made Delta feel better. Hob dropped more unspeakables, 2 branches and a rock. Gob seemed to have been more adventurous as he brought back a little bit of everything. He dropped some dark berries, small stones, and some weedy-looking plants. They all began to instantly melt into mana. It was a shame. Delta wouldn't mind actually keeping some of these things once in a while. She waited, and before long her menu appeared. Wrensberries absorbed, healthberry unlocked. Clingy petals absorbed, decorative flowers unlocked. Sticky floor panel costs reduced by 1 DP. Delta hummed as she read this. The petals seemed to have an annoying habit of sticking to people's clothes. If Gob's furs were to be an indicator, did absorbing the sticky material reduce the burden of buying something? Sticky floor traps seemed pretty simple. An enemy stepped on it and got stuck. Delta paced as she thought about it. By taking more and more things that had a sticky component, she could cut her work in half. Still, only 1 DP was a little lacking in reductions. Delta had a feeling that DP cost was a one-time deal. Still, it wouldn't hurt to get a bit more. The berries were like the apple, the food that she could make. She was supposed to lure people in with them. The idea that food might be in her dungeon. Eyeing her 25 mana, she hesitated and then created another goblin. It formed with a swirl, growling as it formed into the tunnel. Hob and Gob looked unbothered by it, and the goblin also looked rather shocked by the sudden existence. Keep this tunnel safe and watch out for mushies. She added the goblins and lumbering off, going deeper. Delta thought about naming it, and then shrugged. There was going to be so many of these things eventually that it was going to be impossible to keep up with the demands of names. Having a goblin between the entrance and the boss room made the dungeon feel a little bit more professional, which left her with 15 mana to play with. She curiously made an apple to see what it would do. The red, glossy fruit appeared, but it seemed translucent as if not made solid yet. Delta moved it, and it reminded her of the trap placement. She had fun clipping it through walls where it buzzed in error. Hob moved over, not getting more orders, and moved directly through her apple placement. She had fun clipping it through the wall where it buzzed in error. Hob moved after not getting more orders and moved directly through her apple placement. Something happened and quickly vanished as he kept moving. Wait, Delta called and the gob froze. She pushed the apple into him and the whole new menu appeared. Delta blinked, caught completely off guard at this new, odder brother for the personal menu that hovered above for her. Item placement, equip to mob, use 1, binds to soul, drop, monster does not respawn. Use on monster, out of battle, able to use item. Drop, equip. Delta inhaled and looked at the apple in her ghostly hands. Could she make the monster loot drop? Or a soul drop? Delta frowned and let the goblin go without her brother to rest at the camp. They looked bushed and Delta felt a bit guilty for making them basically farm for her the whole day. She focused back onto the apple after making sure that both gobs were comfortable after a moment around the fire. Both of their grubby faces peered down at the hole at Fran's door. Respectful. It took 10 mana to summon a goblin, and it took 3 mana to summon an apple. If that goblin had an apple as a soul drop, that was 13 mana down. For what? Could she booby-trap the monsters, maybe? Put bombs on them in case they were murdered? Delta didn't think so and opened her menu to start flicking through the options. She came to the goblin summoning page and frowned. She held the apple in one hand and then touched the goblin page, not hitting confirm, just poking in the general area. A new box opened. Goblin, a weak demi-being, uses large numbers, quick reproduction cycles, and rare shaman magic to avoid being wiped out. Has many evolution paths around the world. That was handy. Did that work with all her little things? She tried the apple. Healthy apple, a sweet apple that is the barest of healing properties due to being soaked in mana. Delta reread it and silently apologized for mocking the apple where it could hear it. A potential healing apple. Every good tactician saw the use of the thing that kept the troops fighting. Looking through her menus, Delta spotted a tiny change that escaped her notice. On her purchase menus, for items, a tiny button existed next to both the apple and the berry. Delta tried touching the one next to the apple. Would you like to please set the apple to be summoned with a monster or container? Please select which monster from the summons menu, or please choose the chest on the map. Delta felt the blood rush as she discovered some new side of her power. She touched the goblin section and the 2 more options appeared. Equip as an item. Goblins may have 1 weapon, 1 armor, 1 consumable. Summon cost +2 mana. Bind as a soul drop. Goblins will drop this item when it disperses on a chance. Summon cost +1 mana. Delta fled back to her core room. She needed familiar ground to pace about. She barely saw her new goblin standing outside Brand's door, just staring. Odd thing. Quiss sipped on a sweet tea and drew a flask. He would prefer something stronger. Nibs had just got a casket of stumbling minotaur. Quiss sighed wistfully. That stuff had given him some memorable and not so easily remembered moments. Sweet dew would work for today. It gave his work a bit more of a mellow feel. Now, if he worked in a city that had more than 200 people, he'd be diligent and hard-working. But Durance was not those cities, and he gave up being serious after his first year. People took care of themselves here. Being a peacekeeper was the thing that the king required of all towns. Mobs never made anyone happy who had to clean up their messes. Sadly, the taxman still came to them. A fair amount of those rotund taxmen had a second job to make sure that all the king's laws were being followed. Which meant that one day Quiss had found himself taken from his budding wizard studies and dumped into a PK office. A shack that had to be sword and shield symbol painted crudely on one side. No one else had wanted to give up their lives or their hobbies to be the person who had to deal with everyone else. Neither did Quiss, but he slept in the meeting and missed the chance to be pushed onto the deaf elder that lived down the street. Another sign that he needed to quit drinking. First, it was the bad polymorph spell, and now it was the peacekeeper nonsense. Quiss rounded the corner as a woman threatened an orange snake going around a tree. Quiss almost turned around, but the woman had her heat blade powered up, a model that was so out of date that Quiss couldn't hear the blade grumble, protesting as it actually worked. The heat blade was bothersome. The sword that channeled a fire crystal usually resulted in someone's house or livestock going up in smoke. No one wanted a repeat of the great goat fire of 4 summers ago. Quiss waved one hand and the snake floated away into the grass on the other side of the woman's garden. One air spell, he used it mostly to sweep and float, but it worked just fine here. Oh, such a dove! The woman smiled as she thanked him, hiding her weapon as if Quiz would levitate her over the hedge next. Just keeping the peace, he said, with an almost automatic response these days. His voice sounded dulled as he longed for his bed. But he only did this job for 3 reasons. The free drinks at night, the lack of paperwork, and the third reason was he honestly was scared someone would burn his hut down if he didn't keep confiscating charged crystals, crossbows that had been enchanted, unstable homebrew potions, herbal mixes that should really not have been mixed. Then there were the more sane people that just hacked their own limbs off when they got a bit too drunk and fancied themselves knights of the Valrune kingdom. Quiz didn't know healing magics or healing potion mixtures or any herbal remedy for stupidity. But he did know that his old blue coat still inspired people to at least pretend to be rational. Quiz considered that to be a gamble on any given day. He just really wanted people to run out of magic supplies for the month so that he could sleep all day. Now that he thought about it, the air did seem crisper. Mana was a bother. If it was here, your life was mostly great. If it was gone, your life was mostly not great. Mana made things grow. It made people strong to illness and cold. Nothing like actual magic, but it helped. Quiz knew very fairy tales like the back in his nose. Not seen it himself, but definitely sure it was there. Mana made magic, magic made reality. Reality was something they all had to bloody deal with. Some hurrah for magic. Some old maids still believed living on mana-rich land blessed you and your brats. Quiz also knew that the dust of weapons that haven't seen light since his own grandfathers went gob hunting never really went dry of power. So now every June Horn, Quilla, and Nib were blasting magic out of their asses like it was going out of style, which made his job harder, which meant he had to find out why, which meant he could not sleep. Quiz hoped for whatever was making Mana rise was having a good enough laugh at his expense. "Leave me alone," Delta cried as the mushroom invaded her core room. Hob picked it up and shoveled away. Delta thanked him before she went back to her menu. Decorations were, well, pure pretty things. Things to make her dungeon feel less like a randomly generated dungeon, with those super familiar textures and rendered hallways, and more like a unique place of mushrooms and weeds. She hadn't quite figured out how to turn it off, but she was eyeing that Mushroom Grove room. She sighed while she went over on what she learned. Delta could work loot drops into her monsters. This was interesting in its applications. By binding, say an apple, to a goblin's blueprint, for a lack of a better word, she would summon goblins with apples equipped or bound as soul drops. Every single goblin would get an apple. However, it costs more for the goblin to equip it and use it against the adventurers than it would be for intruders to kill her monsters and farm them. The system was biased and Delta would burn it. Until the long way day, Delta saw that the goblin and the apple were 13 mana. A goblin with an apple with a soul drop was 11, and one with a quip was 12. It didn't mean much. 2 mana was not the end of the world. But this was a symbolic number. This was going to grow as she bound more important items to far stronger monsters. A dragon and an orb of immortality would be better combined than summoned separate, saving her a few billion mana. The system wasn't stupid, however. Delta could not remove the item once it was bound. There was no costs coming here. Delta could not spawn an apple goblin and take the apple away to save 2 mana. The system barred her and gave her the worst kidney punch for it. It was a well and good, but the overall question was brought back to why. Why did she reward people for killing her monsters? The obvious answer was, of course, to lure more. Good at killing, make me a buck collecting a dozen rusty swords, and here is a pit, Delta sighed. It made sense from her point of view. The core that used to be on the side of raiding dungeons. But now, as a person who really didn't want people to down here, because the idea of people finding her core sent such waves of dread flowing through her that it physically hurt. It baffled her. Yes, humans gave decent mana, but she already ruled out mindless murder. So was there any point in making her place look appealing to the stabby-happy heroes? The question gnawed at her, and it was the same one that rose when she couldn't seal off her core room. Why did she have to let humans have a fair chance at winning and getting rewards? What did she get out of it? Delta rose and paced. The mana and DP her lifeblood. It was all the sole purpose that she had mobs and traps. To farm those elements. Why? To grow and become more complex. Why? To become famous for not being beatable or to repel invaders. Why? To let her legend grow and let more challenges come. Why? Because what's the point of being a dungeon if there were no people? Delta slowed to a stop. Her dungeon suddenly seemed very quiet. It felt suffocating. The walls that made her feel safe now made her feel entombed. Boss. A voice called, deeper and more powerful than the rest. It took only a second, but Delta was in the boss room, and rounded room looked like a polished, but Delta wondered if it would slowly chip away once people flooded in. Dungeon feels bad. Master, okay. Fran wondered, and Delta sighed. Why do we want men's in the dungeon? She asked, not sure what to expect from Fran. The pig sniffed and oinked in his sleep. Fran was busy jabbing it with his spear, but stopped. The goblin looked over. For power, to grow in legend dungeon, he said with excitement, and Delta frowned. But I don't want to kill them. The men's, I mean, she added, and Fran just nodded. Delta waited and Fran stared. What do you mean, yes? Delta squawked. Fran jumped and his pig squealed in fright. Master just needs to delay. Stall men's till full and power, no? He asked, confused, and Delta just stared. Fran, are you saying that I get mana from things just being in my dungeon? She repeated, and Fran nodded with enthusiasm. Men's give good mana. Some dungeons have inns in middle to keep mana coming. Hob and Gob tell me stories. They heard from Chaman. He added. Delta sat down heavily. I don't need to aim to kill. I just need to make them have an adventure. Do I need to loot block them long enough to leech out the mana from them? I don't have to be a murder hobo dungeon, Delta demanded with joy. He seemed to have a good idea where she was. The other mobs just looked up. Delta wanted to hug the little green deadly pig rider. She then noticed something about the room. Fran, why is there no mushrooms in here? She asked lightly, and Fran looked around and his pig snored lightly. Bacon sees him and gets hungry. He shrugged. Delta loved bacon. End of chapter. That, my friends, concludes this episode. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author of the story, there will be a link below. If you wish to support this channel, there are multiple ways to do so, which will all also be linked below. But the easiest way would be to subscribe and share my videos as much as possible. And until next time, I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.